right, so I've gotten straight A pluses for 3.5 years now in my studies in engineering, and I've done this without having to give up time in the gym or with my friends. And so in this video, we're going to talk about how I've done that, how I've managed this academic success without having to grind, spend countless hours, and without all the stress that comes with that. So let's walk through a few habits that you can develop so your semester will just go a lot more smoothly. All right, so the first aspect of how I do so well in my studies without that extra grind, without all those long hours, is actually just having a timetable. So we all know that it is important to, look after our time, manage our time, and to be organized. And the best way to do that is to just have a timetable. All right, so in school, in or elementary school, first years, you would have a timetable, and that timetable will tell you exactly, you're at this class at this time, then you go to the gym at this time, then you have this other science class at this time and math at this time, and your whole day is laid out. So I'm saying you should do this now. And so before that timetable was all laid out for you, but now you need to create your own. And creating your own is important, right? Because otherwise we have a tendency to just do what we feel like doing in the moment. Some days maybe you told yourself, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna go to the gym tomorrow, and then I'm gonna study during this time, and then I'm gonna see my friends during this time. And then tomorrow comes along and you didn't really have a concrete plan for the day. So you just hit snooze on your phone, and then you lay in bed a little bit longer, you go on your phone, you're too tired, so you don't go to the gym, and then you skip your homework, and the whole day can just go by like this because you're always doing what you feel like doing in the moment. But what you feel like doing in the moment is often actually not what you want to do, okay? You will often scroll on Instagram without actually wanting to scroll on Instagram. You'll often, procrastinate without actually wanting to procrastinate. You do these things because you feel like them, because they're easier, not because you actually want to do them. And so a timetable is going to help you shift from doing the things that you feel like doing, from doing the things that you want to do, right? Because obviously, if you had the choice, you would always do the things you want to do, not the things that you feel like doing. Even though, they might seem like the same thing. The examples I just gave with scrolling your phone, procrastinating, it's obviously not the same thing, right? There's things that you want to do and there's things that you feel like doing. The things that you want to do often require some level or element of effort, right? And the things that you feel like doing are often just easier tasks. And so no matter what, if you haven't deliberately said, I'm going to do this at this time, right? This thing that you want to do, then often when the time comes to do that thing that you want to do, because it usually takes some effort, because it usually takes some, element of difficulty, right? Your brain will just want to go and do what you feel like doing instead, which is always an easier thing. I'm going to go on my phone and scroll. I'm going to watch the new episode on TV. I'm going to go watch some YouTube, right? And so we want to avoid this because often when you're constantly doing the things you feel like, you don't feel good after, right? If you've scrolled on Instagram for 2 hours, you never feel good about doing that after. If you watch 2 hours of YouTube when you're supposed to be studying, you never feel good about doing that after. And so it's ironic, right? Because these are the things that you feel like doing in the moment. These are the things your brain is telling you, I want to do this. But it's not actually the thing that you're going to enjoy. And that afterwards you're going to feel bad about it. And that you should have just done the thing that you want to do instead. So that's the whole goal with this timetable. It's to shift your time from being spent on the things you feel like doing to the things that you want to do. And it does that by concretely writing down the things that you want to do, right? Because let's say you make a timetable, you're essentially, writing down your goals for the day. You're writing down, I want to go to the gym at this time, I want to see my friends at this time, I want to do work at this time, I'm going to go to class at this time. They're essentially a bunch of goals. And we know that when we write down goals, they have a higher chance of getting done, right? So that's what writing this down actually accomplishes. And on top of that, writing down the things that you're going to do in the day, making a timetable is also good because it allows you to essentially, not have to decide what you're always doing in the moment, right? There's this thing called decision fatigue, and it's basically that making decisions takes energy, it takes mental effort, right? And so eventually you're making decision after decision after decision after decision, and that takes energy, right? And so if you're going through your day constantly deciding, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, do I really feel like working, or do I want to just go scroll on social media instead, right? When you make that decision, that takes energy. And every decision you make, even if you're deciding between, two productive things, that decision takes energy, and that energy could have gone to actually doing those productive things, right? So when you can decide on these things in advance, when you already know which task you're doing, you don't need to spend your brain, spend your energy deciding what to do. You just need to spend your brain, spend your energy actually doing that thing. There's a good analogy for this, and basically it's that your computer, right, can only run a certain amount of tasks at a time, or it runs out of memory, right? And if you're running a large amount of tasks, if you have a lot of things going on your computer, well, it slows down the task, right? Because there's so many things going on. And then the same thing applies for your brain, right? If you have so many things going on in your brain, you don't know, when you're going to get this work done, you're trying to plan this other thing, you have a deadline that you haven't written down, and you have all this other stuff while you're trying to maybe get some work done. Well, now you can't get that work done as effectively. You're going to be slower doing that work because you have so many background tasks running, right? And how do we do better work? Well, we need to increase the focus on the actual task we're trying to do. And so we need to close down the tasks that aren't important, the background tasks. And so how do you do that? Well, that's what scheduling, that's what timetabling is. You're writing them down so you don't need to have them in the back of your brain, so you can, quit those tasks. And that's really why building a schedule is so effective. It just frees up a lot of energy to be spent on the things that you actually want to spend it on. And it helps you do the things that you want to do and not the things that you feel like doing. So that's it. And quickly, if you're wondering how do I actually timetable, well, just grab that notes app on your phone, open it up, and you basically just list out hour by hour your plans on how you're going to spend your time, right? So you're going to go to the gym at this time, you're going to train at this time, you have your morning routine at this time, you're going to do some schoolwork at this time, you're going to eat lunch at this time. You just block out your day and then you just follow it. And as long as you do this well, you shouldn't feel like you're fighting an uphill battle and you're always doing things that you want to do. As long as you schedule it well, which I've talked about in a whole nother video here, then this should become very easy to follow. And you'll find that you're just constantly having better days. So that's scheduling or timetabling. And it's one habit that once you really get started with it, you should start to see your days improving. You should be getting more things done that you actually want to do. You might have more time to spend with your friends, more time to spend with your family, more time to exercise. And it just frees up a lot of time and it saves you a lot of mental energy. And I find that the biggest benefit for me is that I just do more of the things that I want to and not more of the things that I feel like doing. So that's scheduling or timetabling, a very effective habit to get started on early on in your semester or whenever, but it should really save you some time, save you, a lot of mental effort, a lot of energy, and then you can carry that energy to other parts of your studies. All right, so the next aspect of getting those good grades, having that good semester is actually really, really simple, and it's going to sound stupid, but just weekly practice, okay? And hear me out. I'm just going to show you something here. So I know how stupid and how easy this sounds, but I just want to show you something here, okay? So, most people throughout their semester, their workload isn't evenly distributed, okay? So if this is time on this axis right here, and this is workload, then most people's distribution of work tends to look something like this, right? Early on in the semester, it's very low, right? They don't have much workload and it slowly builds up. And then it stays pretty like standard. Then midterms comes and it really spikes up like this. And then it drops again. And then finals comes and it really spikes up like this. And then it drops again. And that's it. Okay. So essentially what happens at the normal university experience, the normal level, is that a lot of the time, if you actually broke down what work is being done during the different parts of the semester, a lot of time early on, the workload is actually extremely manageable and can be quite low. And there's only a few times in the semester where the workload becomes, very high and you have to study all-nighters to do this and you need to pull, 10-hour study sessions on the weekend to study for your exam. That's not what most of the year is. And if it is, well, that's a whole nother thing to tackle because most of the time you do not need to be studying these long hours. But regardless, if we look at this graph, right, there's only a few periods of time where the workload really skyrockets, right? It's midterms and exam time. And maybe, there's a couple other spikes throughout the year. So you can see that early on and just throughout the semester generally, you have these areas, these periods of time where the workload isn't as high. And so why is this an issue? Well, of course it's an issue because when exam times comes, when you have these periods of high workload, these can be quite stressful. And these can really, push you off your track, right? Midterm time comes and, because of this heavy workload, maybe you miss a few gym sessions, maybe you slip up. And now, it's so busy and it's a lot harder to get back into that habit. So this big spike, this big workload right here, it acts as a stressor. And, because it acts like a stressor there, you can slip up on certain habits like the gym. Maybe you have other habits that you do, you journal, you do all these other things. And because your workload is so heavy at this time, those things get pushed to the side. And now what happens, right? If you just, miss the gym for exam period, that is what it is, right? But that's not often what happens. A lot of times, you miss a few gym sessions because of exams. And then the next week after, you're still a little bit busy, so you don't get back into the gym yet. And then the next week happens and it's starting to open up. You go 1 or 2 times, but you're still not back into your routine. And so all of a sudden, what could have been, a 1 week period where you just missed a couple gym sessions is now turning into multiple weeks where you've missed multiple gym sessions. And so that's the issue here, because this spike that comes from not properly distributing your workload doesn't just affect that time period, this little, area of time, this region of time. It affects all the time after it as well, right? Because you need to catch up on the habits you missed. You're trying to get back into the gym. You're trying to start seeing your friends again. And then all of a sudden, we've gone this period of time, we're trying to build all these habits again, and then exams come, like final exams come, and you have this even bigger stressor that pops up that will prevent you from doing those, that will prevent you from building up those habits even more, right? And so that's one aspect of why it's important and why you should really consider how your workload is distributed throughout the year, because when you have spikes in your workload, that affects your daily routine, that affects the other habits in your life, right? And also, I mean, apart from that, of course, there's also the advantage that when you prepare in advance, you're a lot more consistent. It's a lot easier to prepare, right? Because we know that intensity tends to produce less results than consistency. So if this is like 8 hours, if this little blip here, this workload represents 8 hours of studying, we know that if you instead, shifted 2 hours to the week before, 2 hours to the week before, and 2 hours to the week before, right? Now, instead of doing 8 hours one week, we're doing 2 hours one week, 2 hours the next week, 2 hours the next week, and then 2 hours in this final little, blip here in this little spike. We know that that's going to be better than having this big 8-hour study session here, right? Because consistency, 2 hours this week, 2 hours this week, 2 hours this week, 2 hours this week is better than intensity, which is 8 hours one week. But I'm not going to go too much more into this. We know that, if you study, if you prepare better, of course you're going to do better in your classes. So that's obvious. We're not going to talk about that. But I just wanted to emphasize the effect not only on your actual preparation for the test, right? It becomes a much more enjoyable experience. You become much more prepared for exams, for, these busy periods of time where other students are going to be unable to do all the things that they want because they're just like locked in. This isn't just for that, right? This isn't just so you do better on your exams, so you're prepared better, so you get better grades. It's also just for you, right? It's so much easier. It's so much more enjoyable to be able to cruise through exam season, to be able to continue to go to the gym, to continue to see your friends. Exam season, or the month before exam, doesn't need to be this time where you lock yourself away, you lock yourself in your basement and you just study for hours upon end. But for some reason, this is kind of a habit that people pick up. It's that exam season is this time where you have no social life, you stop exercising, you stop any good habits, and you just study. But you're not going to be in your best mental, your best energy when you're doing these things, because socializing, exercising, doing all your other good habits, those are things that are good for you. And so you shouldn't put yourself in this place where you have this heavy workload and you're forced to stop these things, because those things, socializing, exercising, those are all going to help you study better, perform better on your exams. So yes, really just consider shifting some of your workload throughout the year. Fill some of these gaps, right? Because the other issue is that, early on in the semester or throughout the semester, when you don't have a heavy workload, students, they tend to, even myself included, we tend to, fill the time with work that doesn't actually need to be done. There's no assignment this week, so I'm going to go, review some other stuff that I learned earlier, or, other students might be thinking, oh, I don't have any, deliverables this week. I don't have a test to study for, so I'm going to go and arrange my notes or make them look all pretty. This is something you see people doing early on in the semester. But realistically, is there some advantage to doing some of these things? Yes. But is the return on investment there? Is the ROI there? No. And so you're just filling this space, these gaps right here, right, with workload that doesn't really need to be done, and that doesn't have too much of a result. So the better thing to do is, instead of filling it with arbitrary work that you're just doing things to be productive, right, fill it with actually productive things. Just dedicate a couple hours each week to each class, like I've done so here, right? And all of a sudden, if every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. you do 2 hours on this one math class that you're in, okay? If that's totally reasonable. We can agree that 2 hours a week dedicated block is something that totally reasonable that almost anybody can do, right? And the results from doing that is just going to be so much greater, because you're shifting your workload every week. Okay, this week I'm going to do chapter 1 practice problems. This week I'm going to do chapter 2 practice problems. This week I'm going to do chapter 3 practice problems. And you're just shifting your workload instead of slamming it all down into 1 week where you literally have no time to do anything else, right? This is not enjoyable. An enjoyable, work distribution is something that looks more like this, okay? It's pretty smooth, right? You can never really make it quite equal, but you have some blips here. Maybe midterms come up, there's a small blip, and then, you bounce around projects, and then finals come, is a little bit bigger, but it's not this, right? It's not these massive, big spikes in workload that become unmanageable. It's just, manageable workload throughout. So just spread out your work. I mean, it's practice. It's simple to do. Just spread out some practice throughout the year, okay? Save yourself during these periods of time. Your future self is really going to thank you. So that's what I want to emphasize there. It's just, there's a lot of value in just spreading it out. It's not so much an issue when, a class has assignments, professors assign things, or you have tutorials or something. That's that 2-hour time that it takes to do that assignment, that it takes to do that tutorial, is that weekly practice that you're doing right here, right? But for classes that don't have that, you need to be making up your own weekly practice. Get the textbook out, review your professor's practice problems, review the ones that he's gone through in class, spend a couple hours a week, and just spread it out. Because again, this is more enjoyable than these, okay? Because when you have your workload evenly distributed, It means that you can still go to the gym. It means that you can still see your friends even during the busy times of the year, like at exams or midterms or something like that. So just think about your future self, have them, want to thank you. And how do you do that? You spread out your workload. So that's the second tip that I had, is just, spread out your workload, have some weekly practice. That should really help to put you in a stronger place to perform well throughout your semester. And the third insight I want you to take from this video to help you perform better in this semester is that you can study a lot less than you think. So people tend to study a lot more than necessary, okay? And I'm talking hours-wise. So generally, people spend too much time studying. And you might ask, Caleb, if people spend too much time studying, why is everybody doing so poorly, right? Why is not every student a perfect straight A+ student? And it's because they spend too much time and they spend too little intensity or effort, okay? Basically, when you're studying, when you're trying to learn things, you can kind of say that effort times time equals learning, okay? And of course, that's the goal, right? Once you learn the material, you can properly present it however you need to in a test, on assignments, projects, whatever it is. So the goal is to learn, right? So effort times time equals learning. And here's the thing, almost everybody studies with just too little intensity. They don't put enough effort into their studying, and as a result, they need to put a lot more time. And so this lack of effort can come from a few things. It could come from, the material you're studying. Maybe the studying isn't conducive to, putting effort in. Maybe the environment is not allowing you to put effort, right? There's a few options, and you can break this down even further. Some material, let's say, reading the textbook, reading notes, or doing practice problems or practice exams, right? These all require different levels of effort. And different environments also will, allow you to put more or less effort into your work. So maybe you're in the library, okay? Maybe you're with friends. Maybe you are studying alone. Maybe you're studying in a quiet place without distractions. And so all of these impact the amount of effort that you can put into your work. And so because it impacts your effort, it also impacts the amount of time you spend studying. And so, for example, let's run through one option, okay? Student A, they're studying in the library with some friends, and they're reading their textbook, and they're going through some lecture notes, okay? That's what student A does, okay? If that sounds familiar, you probably also have experienced long periods of time studying without much result, because all of this, right? The textbook, the notes, the library, the friends, all of this is fairly low effort. And because that effort is low, the amount of time you need to spend studying is higher to reach that same amount of learning. And you might be wondering, okay, like why are those low effort tasks, right? Well, think about it like this. First of all, reading the textbook, reading the notes, that doesn't take too much mental effort, right? You're able to do that while your friend is talking to you or while you're in the library with other noises. Like, those things are easy to do with minimal concentration, or you're able to do them with minimal concentration. And so, as a result, they're low effort tasks. They don't take much focus. They don't take much intensity. They don't take much mental effort. And also, like I was saying earlier, when you have friends talking to you, when you're in the library where there's other distractions maybe, these things, okay, they impact your ability to put that effort into your work. Even if you're doing some high effort work, like practice exams, past papers, I'll talk about that later, it would still be difficult to put in a high amount of effort into that studying if you have friends, conversing with you at the table, or if you're in a busy location, like I said, like the library. Because all these distractions, all these things, every time your friend opens their mouth, every time they show you something on your phone, every time you check your phone, all of that takes away your focus. Without your focus, you cannot put in that mental effort that is necessary to achieve learning with less time. So, realistically, it's very important to think about, hey, how can I maximize the amount of effort I'm putting into my studying in order to minimize the amount of time to get that same amount of learning? Because you would totally take 1 or 2 hours of intense studying over 6 hours of mediocre, low effort studying, right? You would. And so we want to be maximizing your effort. So how do we do that? Picking material that allows you to maximize your effort. Pick things that are active, that actually involve you practicing something. So practice exams, practice papers, textbook problems that your professors provide. Any of these things, okay? Anything that's practice, flashcards if you're like in biology or some other memorization-based class, right? Anything that you're actually actively doing something, not passively reading, passively observing, right? If you want to be putting in that mental effort, to maximize that mental effort, to minimize that time, you need to be picking something conducive to that effort, that you're able to actually put effort in. And so they need to be things that actually require some difficulty, that have some effort involved, right? So like, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that could be practice exams here for student B. And again, we talked about the environment. If you study alone, that's better than studying with friends. Or if you study without distractions, that's better than studying with distractions, because this environment enables you to put more effort into the work, to put more focus into the work, which means you get the same amount of learning in less time. And so, of course, this is easier said than done. It's easier to say, hey, study only practicing things. Don't study with friends. Don't study in the library. Only study alone. It's easy to say those things. It's kind of harder to implement it, right? Because if you have a bunch of friends in the library, you might want to go and study in the library with them. And because you can't focus on your practice exam, maybe you're going to take your textbook out. Maybe you're going to take your notes out and you're going to do something easier, answer emails, something like this. But understand that the lower effort that work is, the more time you need to spend. And so I think the easiest way to actually accomplish this, to actually maximize your effort so that you don't study as much, is to force a time constraint on yourself, okay? Literally tell yourself, hey, what would I do if I could only study for 2 hours per class per week, okay? What would you do? You're forced into this, okay? Think about the times where you have, something is due at 12 a.m. and it's 10 p.m. and you just need to lock in for 2 hours and get this thing done, okay? Naturally, during these times, you find that, hey, you don't get distracted as easily, right? You're not going on your phone because you know that this needs to be done. You're probably not studying with friends because you know that they're going to distract you and you really need to get this thing done by 12 a.m. It's worth 20% of your grade. Like, this is something that needs to be done. And you're surely not going to go and do some like arbitrary random task just to feel productive because it's easier. You're not going to be doing unproductive work. You're going to be doing the task at hand, right? The one that is due at 12 a.m., right? And so can you see how, by putting this time constraint on yourself, or in this case, it was the deadline that forced you to have this time constraint of 2 hours, you basically solved all your problems that was preventing you from putting a lot of effort into your studies, therefore reducing the amount of time you need to study. Because, when you had that 2 hour limit, you weren't distracted as much. You didn't go on your phone as much. You didn't study with friends because you knew that if your friends were there, they were going to distract you. You wouldn't get that thing done by the time it was due. And then you didn't, get distracted on work that wasn't essential because you had work that was essential that needed to be done during that period of time. So think about that, right? Because realistically, if you did put this limit upon yourself, you would solve a lot of your problems in terms of like studying inefficiently and studying not effectively. You would just sit down. You would sit down with a purpose of getting that work done and you would be able to do it. And so that's why I think it's really valuable to put this limit on yourself. Tell yourself, hey, this week I only study 2 hours per class. Okay, calculus, I got to get 2 chapters of textbook problems done in 2 hours. And then chemistry, I got to get this quiz done, this online quiz done in 2 hours. And so by having these time constraints, by saying, hey, I'm only working on this test, or I'm only working on this class for 2 hours this week, okay? It really will force you to study more effectively. Okay, so, think about that. Think about what would you accomplish? What can you accomplish if you actually did 2 hours of intense, effective, high effort work? Because you can accomplish a lot. You can accomplish a lot more than you usually do when you don't have these things in the way, when you don't have the distractions, the phone, the friends, the unproductive work. I'm literally telling you, you can 6x your output in the same period of time when you have a good, intense, high effort work block. Now, the only thing is that it can be kind of difficult to place these time constraints on yourself. Like, I find it hard to stick to my own time constraints sometimes. Like, I would set limits on the amount of time I would spend writing lab reports for any classes with labs, right? Because I found that lab reports, I could get really stuck up on them, typing them forever, trying to make them perfect. And so I would set timers to get, my work done. I got to get this section done in 2 hours, and then I got to get the rest of it done in another 2 hours, right? But it was kind of difficult to stick to these things if I didn't have anything planned later in the day. If I just said, hey, it's a Sunday, I don't have any plans. In this first 2 hour block, I'm going to get the rough draft of the lab done. In the second 3 hours, I'm going to edit it, put the numbers in, submit it, right? But if I don't have anything else later in the day, like, what's stopping me from just using up a 4th hour, a 5th hour, a 6th hour? Like, it can be pretty difficult, right? And so the solution to this, I would say, is just have other things going on in your life, right? Have things planned. This evening you're going out. This evening you're going to the gym with some friends. This evening you're having supper with your family. Like, have these things planned. Have these things going on in your life, right? School doesn't need to be this, school grind thing. It can just be, hey, I'm going to school, I'm doing well, and I have these other aspects of my life too, right? So fill that time so that naturally you're going to need to work more efficiently. Just a couple months back, actually, I was going out for a day trip, okay? And I was leaving at 10 a.m. And I had a video to edit to get out that afternoon. And so editing usually takes me 3 hours, but I only had 2 hours. And so this wasn't a deadline I just put on myself. This was a actual deadline. This work needed to be done in 2 hours. And sure enough, I was able to edit and upload or schedule in that 2 hours. But typically I'm unable to do that. But I was able to do that because I had other things going on in my life that forced myself to get that work done in that period of time. If I didn't have that thing after, if I didn't have that day trip after, that editing would have taken me 3 hours. And so just by doing more things, not school related, not work related, or whatever it is in your case, you force yourself to get that schoolwork done faster, to get that work done faster because you're working at a higher intensity. And so I think this is something that is not always easy to implement, but it is something to definitely be aware of. Maybe 2 hours is not reasonable for you, okay? It probably isn't for me, 2 hours a week per class, but maybe 3 hours is, maybe 4 hours is reasonable. And if you actually stick to this, if you actually set, hey, 4 hours, that's it, I'm sure you would use those 4 hours very effectively. And this also gives you the peace of mind to not have to study during periods of time that aren't for studying, right? The worst feeling is that when you're doing other things, you're maybe at the gym, or you're maybe hanging out with friends, or having dinner, and you can't actually be there, be present, be focused on the moment because your brain is like constantly being pulled to the homework you're supposed to be doing. But if you say, hey, I can only study 2 hours a week, I can only study 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week, whatever it is for this class, the time that is not that 4 hours, you can just be focused on whatever is in front of you because this is not that work time. So it can really just help free up your mental a little bit more. So that's that. I think people study a lot more than they need, and it's because they don't study as effective as they should. If you just choose to fill your time with some other things that are good for you, exercise some more, see your friends more, do all these things, right? Naturally, that work is gonna, figure itself out. You're gonna be able to get it done if you place yourself in these time constraints. Plus all the other stuff that you do, all the other stuff that you fill with, seeing your friends, exercising, these things are good for you. They're good for your mental. And then you get to take that into your studies, right? Because if you just lock yourself in the basement studying for 12 hours a day, you're not actually going to produce that much, right? Because that's not the environment that humans are, meant to be in. You're meant to be in this environment where you're moving, you're seeing people, you're doing these things, and then you do, yes, sit down and get some work done. But that's not how you're built to be working, where you sit at a library desk for 6 hours because you don't want to, have the confidence to just stand up and say, hey guys, we're not doing good work here. I'm gonna go get 1 hour of quality work done now, and then we can go out and actually do something fun later, right? So have that in your mind, because any minute you're not doing effective work, effective studying, realistically, you just shouldn't be studying at all. Because if you're going to sit down and doing the work, you might as well produce results. And if you're not, you might as well go do something else. So take that and just think about it, right? The more low effort work that you do, the more work that you have to do. And that's going to just drain you so much more and not give you the results you want in your semester. So those are the three, pieces of advice, the three insights I have to, having a good semester, to performing well, to having good grades without actually having to, give everything up and just live that grind, study all day life, because it's not enjoyable, right? So that's it. And I hope this video can help you perform this semester.